It would be accurate to say that Aloin Ardran had not intended to speak a single word at the Hollowmere ball. It would be more accurate to say that her sisters left her nothing else to do. And it would be most accurate of all to say that everything which followed, the scandal, the crown, and the blood on the terrace steps, belonged entirely to them, though not one of them would ever admit it. For 9 years she had been the quiet one. 9 years of standing at the edge of rooms with her hands folded, of hearing the words spinster travel toward her across a supper table, with a smile wrapped around it like paper around a stone. She had never answered back. Silence was cheaper than argument, and Iloin had spent most of her life learning what things cost. Then Thessa opened the wager. She did it beautifully, which was the worst of it. She stood in a circle of young wolves, near the north pillars with her glass, at exactly the right height, and her voice carried the way a bell carries, without any apparent effort at all. 2 silver that the king chooses tonight. 4 that he chooses a Vaskar, and 10, she paused for the laugh she knew was coming, 10 that he does not choose my sister. The laugh went around the circle and out past it, picking up people who had not heard the joke and did not need to. Thessa, said Neris, too quietly for anyone to be obliged to hear. What? She has been out 9 seasons. At some point, a thing stops being unlucky and starts being a fact about the thing itself. 10 it is, said a man of House Vaskar, delighted, and money began to change hands. Aloin stood 8 paces away beside a table of untouched pastries and did not move. You have gone red, said a voice at her shoulder. A man had come to stand beside her. Dark coat, well cut and entirely plain. No house color, no chain, no ring. He was holding a glass he had not drunk from. I have not. You have. Just here. He touched 2 fingers to his own throat. It is very distinct. He turned his head. A plain sort of face made unreasonable by the eyes, which were a light gray and far too attentive for a man loitering by the pastries. Your sister is loud, my sister is popular. The 2 arrive together, and you will say nothing to her. No, why not? Aloin opened her mouth to give the answer she had given for 9 years, which was that it did not matter, and found this sentence would not come. It had worn through. It had been carrying weight it was never built for, and it had finally, quietly, in the middle of a ballroom, given way. Because everyone in this room believes the same thing she does, she said, that I have been waiting. That each year, no one has chosen me is a year subtracted from what I am worth. They think I have been idle for 9 years. I have not been idle for 9 years. What have you been working? She said it before she could weigh it. Ardran Hall runs on 240 souls and 11,000 acres of bad drainage. My uncle signs the papers. I write them. I know what every field in the Lofen yields, and what it ought to yield. I know the crown grain returns for this district have come in short 4 years running, and that nobody upriver has ever asked why, because it is easier to write down that the Lofen is poor than to discover it is being robbed. She stopped. She had never said that aloud to anyone. The man in the plain coat had gone very still. Short. By how much? 1/5 the first year, nearly 1/3 the last. And whose signs for the district at the granary end? Something moved at the back of Aloin's neck, the small cold prickle of a thing not fitting. It was an odd question. It was in fact exactly the right question, and there were perhaps 6 people in the realm who would know to ask it, and none of them ought to have been standing by the pastries in an unmarked coat. You are not a guest, she said slowly. I am absolutely a guest, and I have behaved impeccably. He set his glass down beside hers. Finish it. You are not finished, and she did, because he waited. Because 9 years of silence came apart in front of a stranger who asked about a granary, and then stood there with the patience of a man intending to listen. The rest of it is that I have held this house up since I was 18, and not one person here would call that an accomplishment, because a woman's work is not real until a man puts his name on it. Everything I have done is invisible, And everything I have not done is a scandal. They will bury me under a stone that says she never married, and they will believe they have described me. Behind her, the room had begun to change temperature. So, I have never been waiting. I have been holding up a roof, and I would like, just once, for somebody to look up. The music stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Mid-phrase. She turned. Every face in the hall was pointed at the pastry table. Thessa's glass had halted halfway to her mouth. Uncle Ansel, by the far doors, had gone gray to the lips. And all of them were looking not at Elowen, but slightly to her left, at the man in the plain dark coat, who had straightened off the table and was now unmistakably the largest presence in a room holding 400 people. "Ah," he said. "There it is." A steward came through the crowd at a run, dropped to one knee, and said, "Your Majesty, forgive us. We did not know you had come through the gardens." The floor of the world tilted very gently under Elowen's feet. Tiaven of Ivern, Alpha King, 4 years crowned, described to her 100 times as a young man of great charm and no substance, picked up his untouched glass and considered it. "I have stood here a quarter of an hour," he said, "and nobody offered me anything but pastry." Her wolf, which had spent a lifetime being sensible, advised her to kneel and leave the country. "You let me talk," she said. "I encouraged you to talk. I said the crown does not ask why. It does not. No defense at all. That was the part I found interesting." Thessa was already coming forward, chin high, and Elowen understood with distant admiration that her sister meant to save this. "Your Majesty, forgive my sister. She is not accustomed to company and speaks without thinking." She meant nothing by it. 9 years in one sentence. Something in Elowen that had been folded up small and put away for a very long time stood up. "I meant every word," she said. The hall made a sound like a held breath. "Elowen," Ansel said from the doors, low and desperate. "I meant every word, and if His Majesty would like it again in front of the whole room, I will say it slower." Kayvan turned. Whatever had been amused in his face went out of it, and what lay underneath was not amused at all. It was awake. "Say it slower," he said. "Somebody is stealing from you," Elowen said. "They have done it so long they have stopped being careful. The people who know are women who sign nothing, and tenants who cannot write. You have been robbed in a hand so plain that a spinster with a ledger found it, and you did not know." The silence went on a long time. "What is your name?" "Elowen Ardren." "Elowen Ardren." He said it the way a man says a word he intends to keep. Then he raised his head to 400 people, who had come to Hollowmere to be chosen, and his voice filled the hall without rising at all. "It is customary for the king to choose at this ball. I have put it off 4 years, to irritate my council. I find I no longer wish to." Thessa's face turned toward him, luminous, certain. "I choose," said Kayvan, and lifted one hand and began to turn. The terrace doors blew open. Cold air came through them, and with it a guardsman in Ardron colors who did not stop to bow, who came 6 paces into the ballroom with his sword still sheathed and his gloves ruined to the wrist, and who said, into a room where a king had been 3 words from the end of a sentence, "There is a body on the steps." Nobody knew what he had said. That was the impossible thing. 400 people had heard the King of Ivern say the word choose, and not one of them agreed on what came after it. Half the house swore he had turned to the pastry table and named her outright. The other half swore the doors had opened first, and no name had been spoken at all. A footman insisted he had heard the whole of it. A cousin insisted the footman had been in the cellar. By 2 in the morning, there was a wager running in the servants' hall, with better odds than anything Thessa had opened. Elowen had been standing 3 feet from his mouth, and she did not know either. Her ears had been roaring so loudly by then that she had heard only weather. At 5:30, Nerys came in without knocking, and sat on the end of the bed with her feet tucked under her, the way she had done when she was small and frightened of the wind. "They are saying he named you. They are saying a great many things. Thessa has not come out of her room." She threw the mirror. Which mirror? The good one. That was our mother's, Elowen said, and was startled by how much it hurt. I know. Nerys picked at a thread in the coverlet. Then, in a much smaller voice, what did you do? Which was the thing Elowen could not explain to anybody, because she had not done anything. She had stood by a table of pastries and told the truth to a stranger, and the truth had turned out to have a crown on. I told him, the loaf-and returns are short. Nerys stared at her. You told the king about the ledgers. The ledgers are ours. Nerys had gone white. You told the king about our ledgers. Something in the way she said it snagged. Not frightened for her sister. Frightened of something else. And underneath it, so quick that Elowen nearly missed it, a flick of the eyes toward the door. Nerys. What? Nothing. Nerys stood too fast. Nothing. I am glad you are not hanged. She went out. Elowen sat in the dark and thought about her sister's eyes going to the door, and put it somewhere she would not be able to leave it alone. Uncle Ansel sent for her at 7. He was in the estate room, which Elowen thought of as hers, because she had spent 9 years in it, and he had spent every one of them signing what she brought him. He was a big man, gone soft with age, and when he turned from the window, his face held so much fear for her that her throat closed. Sit down, child, uncle, sit down. He waited until she did. I have had 4 hours to think, and enjoyed none of them, so let me lay it out. There are 2 ways this ends, and both are bad. The first is that he did not name you. Then you are a woman who stood up in front of the whole loaf-and and told the crown it had been robbed under its own nose, and every house that ever took a coin out of a grain wagon now knows your face. Let them know it, Elowen. He said it gently, which was worse than shouting. The second is that he did name you, and I do not think you have let yourself understand what that would mean. I would be queen. It sounded absurd in her own mouth. You would be gone. He sat down heavily across from her. At Kelmore, by the end of the month, with 40 servants and nothing whatever to do, someone else would keep the loaf and books. Someone else would ride to the eastern tenants in February and stand in the mud arguing about flock counts. Someone else, and not you. He watched her. That is what he would be taking. Not your hand, your work. And that was the trouble with Uncle Ansel. He was the only person alive who knew exactly what she was, which made him the only person alive who could frighten her properly, because he was right. 9 years. The stone floor of the granary in the cold, the long columns in her own hand. 240 souls who had never thanked her and did not need to, because being thanked was not the point. The point was that the roof stayed up, and she was the one holding it. Take that away, and there was nothing underneath. There had never been anything underneath. She had built her whole self out of a job. No one believed she had. He will not have named me, she said. Men like that do not. Men like what? Men who can have anything. She went to the window, so he could not see her face. He came through the gardens in a plain coat, so nobody would kneel at him. And he found a plain woman at the pastry table, and had a plain conversation. It will have been the most restful quarter of an hour he has had in a year. He will wake at Kelmore this morning and remember it as a good evening. Ansel was quiet behind her. Then carefully, and the man on the steps, she turned around. They are calling it a fall. A groom. Drink, ice on the stone, an unlucky angle. The steward has it in hand. His gloves were ruined to the wrist. Who was the guardsman who came in, both hands, past the cuff, and not from the rain? You do not come away like that from turning over a man who fell. She watched her uncle's face. You do not check a fall for a pulse with both hands. You do that when you are trying to stop something. Ansel looked at her for a long moment, with an expression she could not read at all. You notice too much, he said at last, and it sounded almost like grief. You always have. It has never once made you happier. Uncle. Leave the steps to the steward. He got up. Please. For once in your life, put something down. She had drawn the breath to argue. Then the gate bell rang. Once, And again the long double toll that Ardran Hall used perhaps twice in a generation, and Ansel's head came up like a struck animal. That is the state peel boots. In the yard. Not one horse. Many. Aloan reached the window in 3 steps, and her hands went cold on the sill, because the courtyard was filling with riders in the black and iron of the royal house, and they were not dismounting the way men do at the end of a journey. They were forming up. They were forming up the way men do when someone is about to walk between them. "He is here," she said. The man who came through the doors of Ardran Hall was not the man from the pastry table. Aloan understood that before she had finished turning. The plain coat was gone, and so was the loitering ease, and what came in instead changed the pressure of the air, the way weather does before it breaks. Her own wolf sat up hard beneath her skin without being asked. Every servant in the room went to one knee at the same instant, not out of ceremony, but out of the plain animal need, to be lower than he was. He was younger than a king ought to be, and it did not matter in the slightest. "Ardran," Caovan said pleasantly. "Your Majesty." Ansel was already down, his bad knee cracking on the stone. "You honor this house beyond speaking. I doubt it. Get up." The king's eyes traveled the hall and arrived at Aloan, who had not knelt, her knees having declined the instruction. "Good. Nobody has locked her in an attic." "Majesty, if there is discipline owed for last night, let it fall on me. My niece was overwrought. She is not accustomed to company, and I take responsibility for every word." "Yes," said Caovan. "She mentioned that people say that about her." Ansel's mouth stayed open, with nothing coming out of it. Thessa came down the stairs then, in the green, her hair done, and Aloan felt something almost like pity, because her sister had been awake all night preparing to be magnificent for a man who had already decided something. "Your Majesty." "Which one is this?" "Thessa Ardran, Majesty, the second daughter, the one with the wager." He said it without heat, and Thessa's face went the color of ash. 10 silver. "I hope nobody is paid out. It would embarrass them." He walked past her as though she were furniture. "Now," he said, arriving in front of Aloan, "I am told there is confusion about what I said last night. There is a wager running in your own servants' hall about it. There is one running in mine, and the odds are worse." He looked at her with those attentive gray eyes. "Let us settle it." I said, "I choose Aloan Ardran." And then a man came through the terrace doors with somebody else's blood on him, and the entire Lofen decided it had gone deaf. The hall made a sound. "You did not say that. I assure you I did." "You did not." Her voice was shaking, and she could not stop it. "You had not finished. You said I choose, and the doors opened. I was standing in front of you. There was no name. How strange! I have been saying your name all night. To my council at length, and to a foreign envoy at 4 in the morning, and neither enjoyed it either." He turned to the hall and raised his voice very slightly. "Let it be plain, since the district requires it. I have chosen. The lady is Aloan Ardran of the Lofen, and I would take it as a personal unkindness if anyone in this house made her a joke a second time." "Majesty," Ansel said in a voice with nothing in it. Aloan stood absolutely still and felt her life go out from under her, and underneath the roaring, there was one small cold thought, sitting up very straight and refusing to be swept away. "He is lying." He had not finished the sentence. She had stood close enough to watch the shape of the first word start and stop, and she knew it the way she knew her own hand. Whatever he had been about to say, he had not said it. And now he stood in her father's hall, inventing a thing that had not happened, and doing it so smoothly that 400 people would remember it differently by supper. "May I ask?" Ansel said, recovered enough to sound careful. "Forgive me, Majesty, but the realm will ask it, so let it be me." "Why her?" "Because I have been courting her for a year." Eloan's head came round so fast her neck hurt. "By letter," the king went on comfortably to the hall at large, which I would have thought obvious to anyone who has seen the volume of correspondence leaving this house. She has advised me on the Lofin return since last autumn. I found her sense superior to my counsels, which is a low bar, and her handwriting superior to mine, which is a lower one. I did not announce it because she asked me not to. He glanced sideways. She was extremely insistent on discretion. I found it maddening. Elowen had never written a letter to the King of Ivrin in her life. She opened her mouth, and in the half-second before she used it, she saw exactly what the sentence would cost. Deny it, and she was a woman who had stood in a public ballroom and abused the crown for sport before 400 witnesses, with a man dead on the steps outside. There was no version of that she survived. Let it stand. And last night was not a scandal at all. It was a lover's quarrel with a year of history behind it, and the whole mad business became something the Lofin would tell fondly for 30 years. He had not given her a way out. He had given her a rope. It was around her neck, and he was holding the other end, and smiling. She closed her mouth. Kievan saw her do it. Something moved behind his eyes that might have been approval and might have been apology. "A year," Ansel said, faintly. "A year," Elowen heard herself say. "Now." Kievan clapped his hands once. "Ardron, before I forget, your steward has some nonsense about a groom on the steps. An accident, Majesty. Ice on the stone." "So I am told." The king's tone was light as paper. "Still, double your watch. Humor me. I have grown superstitious about steps." "Majesty," Ansel bowed, and relief came off him like heat. "And I would like a moment with my betrothed." The hall emptied. Thessa went last and slowest, and did not look at her sister once. When the doors shut, Elowen said quietly, "You are lying," comprehensively. "There are no letters?" "There is a drawer at Kelmore with 61 letters in it," Cavan said, "in a small, careful hand, signed with your name, and I have read every one of them twice." He was not smiling anymore. "Which is why I stood at that ball for a quarter of an hour, watching a woman who has never written to me in her life, and let her tell me about my own granaries." The room went very quiet. "Bring your ledgers, all of them. Tomorrow at Kelmore, and tell no one what they are for." Then he was gone, and Elowen stood alone in her father's hall with 61 letters she had never written, sitting in a drawer somewhere with her name at the bottom of them. The drawer was walnut, and it was full. 61, Kievan said. "I counted them the way a man counts stairs in the dark. Sit down and read." Lowen sat down in a chair at Kelmore that was worth more than the Ardrin granary roof, and picked up the letter on top of the stack, and her hands were not steady. The hand was careful. Small, upright, a little cramped, the writing of somebody working slowly on purpose. And it was not hers, and it was not anyone she knew. The second thing arrived 4 lines in, and went through her like cold water. "Your Majesty, the eastern tenants of the Lofin will under-report their flocks again this spring. They are not thieves. They are frightened, because the last man who declared honestly had his rent raised inside a month, and they have long memories." She had said that, out loud, in the estate room at Ardrin Hall, to her uncle, in February, with the shutters closed. She turned the page over as though the back might explain itself. It did not. "Read another," Cavan said. He had not sat down. He stood at the window with his arms folded, watching her the way a man watches a fuse. She read another, and another. Drainage on the west fields. The granary floor, and its slow rot. The 2 carters who were skimming, and the one who was not, and had been blamed anyway. 9 years of her working life in someone else's writing. Signed Elowen Ardrin, in a signature nothing like her own, which had never mattered, because nobody at Kelmore had ever seen hers. "These are my thoughts," she said. "They are my exact thoughts. Some of them are my words." She looked up. "Whoever wrote these was in the room." "That," said Kievan, "is the first thing you have said today that I did not already know, and I have been waiting for it since dawn." She set the letter down very carefully, because her hands wanted to crumple it. "Because the last letter came in the spring and asked me to choose a Vosker at Hollowmere, publicly. And soon." He said it flatly. 61 of them came to me. There are 90 more in my father's press that came to him before me. Somebody has spent 9 years building a woman who does not exist, patiently, letter by letter, so that when she finally asked for something, the crown would give it. Then I came to that ball in a plain coat to look at her before she looked at me, and found her at a pastry table telling 400 people the crown had been robbed under its own nose." A pause. "That woman wanted my ear. You wanted the roof to stay up." It was, she thought, the strangest compliment anyone had ever paid her. "Then let me go," she said. He turned his head. "Take back the engagement," she said. "Say I refused you. Say I was overwrought and not accustomed to company. You may have it for nothing, and the Loafin will laugh at me for 30 years. And I am the one woman in the realm who genuinely does not care. No, Majesty. No, and I will tell you why, and you will not enjoy it." He came away from the window. "If I put you down now, whoever wrote those letters learns that I know they are forged. And then the only person in the Loafin who can read a grain ledger and tell me what is wrong with it becomes a woman standing alone in a house with them." He looked at her. "You are safer engaged to me than you are anywhere else on this earth, and I am sorry about it, because you did not ask for either. You could simply arrest my uncle." "On what?" "A handwriting I cannot match, and a feeling in my stomach." He shook his head. "Ansel Ardran was your father's brother. He sits on 2 councils, and half the Loafin would ride for him tomorrow. If I take him on a hunch, I have blood in the streets by the following week. I have to be certain. Certain enough that not one man alive can argue it." "Then be certain faster," Eloin said, and heard her own rudeness a full second after it had left her. Kayavin laughed, a real one, startled out of him. "There she is." He dropped into the chair opposite and pushed the ledger box toward her with one boot. "Very well. You have been condescending to me since yesterday evening. Let us find out whether it is earned. Teach me." She stared at him. "Teach you what?" "This." He tapped the box. "All of it. I have been king 4 years, and I have never once read a granary return that somebody had not already summarized for me. You told a ballroom. I do not ask why. You were right. So sit there and make me ask why, until I am sick of the sound of it. You are not serious. I am painfully serious, and it is very unbecoming. So let us both move past it." So she taught him. She had meant to be brisk and was not, because he was interested, which she had not prepared for. He wanted to know why the columns ran in that order, what the margin marks meant, how she told a lie from a bad harvest at a glance. When she showed him 3 returns, each altered by a single stroke, a 6 made into an 8 in a hand not quite her clerk's, he leaned over the page on his elbows and did not speak for a full minute. "There," he said at last, and his finger came down beside hers on the paper. "The same stroke every time. He always thickens the top. Yes, he has done this hundreds of times, and he has never once thought about it." He looked up, delighted, and he was very close, and Eloin became abruptly and stupidly aware that she had not been within arm's length of a man since she was 18, and had forgotten what it did to the air. She sat back. "You have gone red again," Kayvan observed. "It is warm in here. It is not remotely warm in here." He let it go, which he had not expected, and turned back to the page. "How much authority do you have at Ardran Hall?" "None. My uncle signs." "Wrong answer. Try again." "None," Eloin repeated. "I write it, he signs it. That is the arrangement, and it has been the arrangement since I was 18. Calvin reached across the desk, took a blank sheet, wrote 4 lines on it, and pressed his seal into the wax without waiting for it to cool properly. "Now you have some," he said, and slid it to her. "That gives you the right to open any grain book in this realm, in my name, and to stop any order you find wasteful, and to be obeyed while you do it. Nobody signs above you, Not your uncle. Not my counsel. Not me. The Lowen looked at the paper for a long moment. You do not know me, she said. I have read 150 letters, written by somebody pretending to be you, which means I know exactly what you are worth to the people who want you quiet. He stood and took the topmost page from a second and much older bundle. Take the earliest one home and see if the date tells you anything. It meant nothing to me. I did not grow up in that house. She took the first letter with her, and she did not look at the date until she was in the carriage with the loafin going by Gray in the window. It had been posted on the 4th day of the month. Her father had been buried on the 22nd of the month before, 11 days. Whoever had begun writing to the crown in her name had started before the ground over her father had finished settling, and had not stopped for 9 years. The loafin granary at night smelled of dust and cold iron, and Eloin had never in her life been frightened in it until she brought a king inside. This is the floor, she said, holding the lamp low. Look at the boards. That gap runs the whole length of the east wall, and when it rains, the sacks at that end take water and rot from the bottom up, so the loss is real. That is the honest part of the shortfall, perhaps a 20th. Caven crouched and put his palm flat on the boards. And the other 4/5 walks out of that door on a wagon at night. She turned. You want to know how I found it? Because I am the only person in this district who has ever come down here after dark. Nobody watches the woman who has nowhere better to be. They mocked me for it for 9 years. It is the only reason your granary is not empty. He looked up at her, with his palms still flat on the boards, and something in his face changed shape. Say that again. Which part? The part where being laughed at is the reason I still have grain. Then the lamp went out. It did not gutter. Somebody put it out, from behind, and Eloin had her hand on Caven's collar and both of them down behind the stacked sacks before the sound of the shutter had finished. 4, she breathed. Perhaps 5. How can you? Possibly. Because I know what this room sounds like empty, and it does not sound like this. Be quiet. Boots on the boards. Careful ones, spread wide, sweeping the floor in a line. Not thieves. Thieves hurry. Eloin did not think about it. She reached back in the dark and found the rope that ran to the loading hatch, the one she had complained about in writing 4 separate times because it hung at exactly the height to catch a shoulder, and she pulled it. The hatch came down, like a dropped anvil. Somebody screamed. In the half-second of confusion, she was up and moving, and she took the nearest man off his feet with the lamp bracket and put him into the sacks, and the second one turned toward the noise, and she was already inside his reach and past him. The third one did not go for the king. That was the thing she would think about afterward, lying awake. He was 3 paces from an unarmed and entirely unguarded monarch, and he turned away from him and went for the table where the ledger box sat open. Eloin threw herself across the gap and got a hand on the box, and his blade came down and caught her along the forearm, and she did not let go. A whistle cut the dark, short, clean. They broke off as one, not scattering, not panicking. A disciplined withdrawal, the way trained men leave a place when the work has failed, and the wages are still owed. Then, silence, and cold air off the river door, and Caven striking a light with hands that were perfectly steady. You are bleeding, he said. I am aware. Eloin was still holding the ledger box against her chest. Majesty, look at me. I am looking at you. You are alarming. You did not shout. You did not run. You did not ask what was happening. She stood up, and the room swung and she let it. A man came into a dark room with a blade to kill you, and you crouched behind a sack and waited. And you were not surprised. Not for one instant. How many times? Caven wound his own coat around her arm and pulled it tight before he answered. That was not for me, he said. That is not what I asked. It is the more interesting question. He tied the knot off. He walked past a king to reach a box of loaf-and returns. So, whoever paid him tonight is more frightened of what is written in that box than of what is sitting on my head. Eloin looked down at the box in her arms. 9 years of her own handwriting. She had spent one full day being told she was worth something, and it had already got her cut open, and the strangest part was that she did not want to put the box down. "You did not answer me," she said. "How many times have they tried?" He was already turning for the door and the charm had come back down over his face like a shutter. "Let us get that arm seen to," said the king of Ivran. And Aloin, standing in the ruin of her own granary, with her arm bound up in a king's coat, began that night to keep a list. The list grew for 5 weeks and explained nothing. She wrote it in the back of a ledger because that was where she put things she meant to solve. Items 1 through 3 were the attempts, or what she believed were attempts, and item 3 had a question mark, because a bolted horse on the Kelmore Road was not proof of anything except a bolted horse. Item 4 was the whistle. Item 5 was that in 5 weeks she had asked the King of Ivran a direct question 30 or 40 times, and received an answer to none of them. He was extraordinarily good at it. She would ask who had held the granary contracts before House Vaskar, and he would tell her she had ink on her cheek. She would ask about the man on the terrace steps at Hollowmere, and he would ask whether she had eaten, and 11 minutes later they would be discussing drainage, and she would have no memory of agreeing to it. "You are doing it again," she said, in the Kelmore archive at some hour past midnight. "Doing what?" "Being charming at me instead of answering." "I am insulted. I am charming at everyone. You are not remotely special." He was lying on his back on the archive floor, with a survey map held above his face, because he had said the light was better at that angle, and she suspected he simply liked lying down. "Ask me something else, and I will consider it." "Who taught you to read a ledger?" "Nobody. That is rather the point of view." He lowered the map and looked at her upside down. "Ask me a real one. Why will you not tell me how many times they have tried to kill you?" "Because you would put yourself in front of the next one," Kaivan said. "And I have already watched you do that once, and I found I did not care for it." She had no answer for that at all, which was becoming a pattern. The work, at least, was solid. She rode to the eastern tenants in the mud, with the royal seal in her coat, and watched grown men who had known her since she was a child, read a paper, saying nobody signs above her, and watched them look up at her differently, and did not know where to put her own face. She stopped an order that had doubled the guard on an empty warehouse for 2 years. She opened 4 district books nobody had ever opened. And somewhere in those 5 weeks, without permission, the thing she had been calling suspicion changed underneath her. It happened by degrees, and she catalogued every one of them, with a kind of horror. That he read, while she wrote and did not fill the silence. That he had started saying "we" about the Lofen. That on the eastern road he had taken his gloves off to fix her stirrup, and she had looked at his hands for slightly too long, and he had noticed her looking, and said nothing whatsoever, which was worse. There was a night on the north stair when she came down with an armful of surveys, and he was coming up, and neither of them stood aside, and for 3 or 4 seconds they simply stood there on the same step, in the dark, with the papers between them. He said, "Captain of my granaries." She said, "That is not a rank." He said, "It is now," and went past her, and she stood on the stair for some while afterward, holding surveys she had entirely forgotten the purpose of. She was 27 years old. She had spent the whole of her adult life being extremely reasonable about not being wanted. She had built a whole life on the assumption and had thought the foundations were good, and now she lay awake in a narrow bed at Kelmore, with her heart going like a hammer over a man who took his gloves off and found that the reasonableness had been a shed built over a hole. She was furious about it. It did not help. It got worse. Then, on a Tuesday, in a box of Vaskar freight receipts nobody had touched in 3 years, she found a payment. It was small, it was routed twice, and it was made out to a factor's name. She had seen exactly once before, in her uncle's own hand on the back of a note about winter feed. Aloan sat very still, with the paper between her fingers for a long time. There would be an explanation. Ansel had bought feed from half the factors in the district for 20 years. One name on one note proved nothing. She was tired. And a person who goes looking for a pattern will find one in a plastered wall. She put the receipt back in the box. She noted the box. She did not note the receipt. Then she went and found the king, and she did not show it to him. And she never afterward decided whether that had been loyalty to her uncle or simple cowardice. "I cannot do this," she said. He was at the long table with his sleeves rolled. He looked up. "5 weeks," she said, and her voice was doing something she could not govern. "5 weeks. Of you deflecting and joking and standing too close, and I am at the end of it. Tell me what I am for. Tell me you needed a woman inside Ardran Hall who could read. Tell me the engagement is a screen, and I am the cheapest one available. Tell me anything with a shape to it, because I can manage being used. I have been useful my entire life, and it costs me nothing." Her hands were shaking. "What I cannot manage is not knowing. I was not built to want things I am not going to be given, and you are making me want." The archive was very quiet. Cavan set down his pen. "What if there is no shape to it?" he said. "What if I simply want you? Men like you do not want women like me. You keep saying that as though it is arithmetic. It is arithmetic. It is the only arithmetic anybody in the Lofen has ever agreed on." He came around the table, not quickly. "The way a man crosses a floor towards something that might bolt." "Then tell me to stop," he said, "and I will go out that door tonight and never trouble you again. I will hold the engagement in name until you are safe, and then I will give it back to you. And you need never see me." He was close enough now that she had to lift her chin, or tell me to prove it. Her pulse was very loud. "Prove it," said Aloan Ardran. And every careful thing in her head went white and silent at once. She woke a Kelmore with gray light on the ceiling and a king asleep beside her, and lay there for a while doing what she had done every morning of her adult life, which was an inventory. 9 years of certainty, about herself, gone in a night. It ought to have felt like loss. It felt like a wall coming down in a house she had never realized was dark. "You are counting," Cavan said into her shoulder, not opening his eyes. "I am not. You are. You do it with your fingers. It is horrifying, and I have grown fond of it." The betrothal feast was 9 days later, and Aloan stood at the top of the Kelmore stair in blue silk and understood at last what her sisters had wanted all those years, and how little of it was worth having. Ansel had brought them both to court. Thessa had been magnificent for 11 days running, and looked as though it was killing her. Nerys had barely spoken. "You look devastating," Kyavan said at her ear. "I look like a woman wearing somebody else's life. You look like the captain of my granaries, in a very good dress, which is the most frightening thing in this building." He set her hand in the crook of his arm. "Come. Let me walk you past the envoy from Korith so he can see who actually writes my grain returns." She let herself be walked. That was new too. The letting. It was Nerys who caught her sleeve by the pillars. An hour in, with her face all wrong. I need to tell you something, and I need to do it now, before I lose the..." "Nerys." Ansel's hand came down on his niece's shoulder, warm and fond and absolutely immovable. "There she is," he said. "Come and greet the envoy, child. You have been hiding all evening." And he steered her away, and Nerys went, and did not look back. And Eloan stood by the pillars, with the cold coming up through the marble. Later, when the dancing had thickened and nobody was watching a king, Cavan took her out along the old wall walk above the muniment tower, where the music went thin and the wind came up off the river. They stood a while without speaking. "You hate this," Aloan said. "Hate is a strong word. You are lying. You have a face you keep for it. I have seen you use it on the Korith envoy 9 times tonight, and it is not the same face you had in the granary, with your hand flat on the boards." He laughed, and then he stopped laughing. "I was 23, he said. My father died on a Tuesday, and by the Thursday there were 4 men in the council chamber deciding which of them would be regent in fact, if not in name, and they were doing it in front of me, because I was a boy who smiled a great deal and had never once been dangerous. He was looking out at the water, so I let them go on thinking it. I smiled. I was charming. I signed what they put in front of me, and I read it afterward, instead of before, alone, at night, and I have been doing that for 4 years. It works. Nobody has ever tried to unseat a man who is not in their way. A pause. The difficulty is that after a while you cannot remember which of it was strategy. You only know that everyone in the room is pleased with you, and none of them are looking at you, and that on the whole, you prefer it, and that preferring it is probably the worst thing that has ever happened to you. The wind moved. Eloan thought about a man in a plain coat at a pastry table, standing where nobody would kneel. "Is that why you came to Hollowmere in a plain coat?" she said. "So that for a quarter of an hour somebody would talk to whoever is left." He did not answer. His jaw had gone tight, and she recognized it because it was the exact shape her own face made when someone came too near a thing she had spent years not saying. She reached up and put her hand against his cheek. "I do not like the king very much," she said. "He is very charming, and he is extremely tiring. But the man who lay on the archive floor with a map over his face and asked me why the columns run in that order, I like him a great deal. And I would like the record to show that I found him before anybody told me to." Kaivan's breath went out of him. "Eloan," he said, and his voice had come apart in the middle of it. Then he kissed her, and the world tipped. It was not the heat. She knew about the heat by now. This was something else, entirely. Something that came in through the place where they touched and kept coming. Relief and terror and a fierce, aching tenderness that was not hers, that had never been hers, that she was somehow standing inside. She felt him, all of him, distinct and clear and utterly foreign, and underneath everything, running like water under stone, an old grinding loneliness she had never once suspected. Eloan jerked back with a gasp. Kaivan's eyes were black. He had gone completely still. "Did you?" he said. Her heart was going so hard she thought the whole tower must hear it. Because she knew what it was. Every wolf in Ivor knew what it was. And 9 years of arithmetic stood up in her chest, all at once, and said, in her uncle's voice and her sister's voice and her own, that men like him do not. "It was a kiss," she said. Kaivan did not move. "A kiss," he repeated. "That is all it was. We are tired and it is late." And it was a kiss. Something went out behind his face. Not anger, worse. He gathered himself back together in front of her, piece by careful piece, and when he spoke again, the voice was the smooth one, the one he used on envoys and frightened councilmen, the one he had not used on her in weeks. "Of course," said the King of Ivern. "You are quite right. Probably nothing at all." He went down to the muniment tower afterward to be alone, which she only knew because she followed him at a distance and hated herself the whole way. She had reached the second landing when she stopped, because there was a smell under the wood smoke that had no business being there, a dry green bitterness with a metal edge behind it, and she had met it exactly once before, in a shepherd's hut in the eastern Lothian, where a man burned the wrong root for an aching joint and lost the use of his hands for a year. She took the last 4 stairs together. The study door was shut. The fire behind it had been built up high, a good hot fire for a king who wanted to sit alone, and Kaivan was in the chair in front of it, with his head back and his eyes closed and his hand hanging slack over the arm. Eloan crossed the room, got both hands in his collar, and hauled. "Up. Now, get up. Eloan. What? Do not breathe." She had him half over her shoulder and through the door and out into the corridor, and she kicked the door shut behind them and dragged him another 20 paces before she let him down against the wall. "Do not breathe until I tell you." He was already gray. That was how long it had been. "Wolfsbane," she said, "in the wood. Someone banked that fire with it and shut the door." and you would have been asleep in 10 minutes and dead before the small hours, and every physician in this house would have written that the king's heart stopped in his chair. Her hands shook on his collar. Look at me. How many is that now? Kievan looked up at her from the floor. 4, he said. The corridor was very cold. Say nothing, he said. What? Not to the watch, not to your uncle, not to anyone. He got a hand on the wall and pushed himself upright far too quickly. For a man who had just been carried, the Korath envoy signs the grain treaty in 6 days. If word goes out tonight that somebody murdered a king at his own betrothal feast, he is on the road home by morning, and there is no treaty and no Korath grain, and the loafin goes into winter on 1/3 of what it needs. He held her eyes. Your loafin. Give me 6 days, and I will hand you the whole thing, and you may do what you like with it. You are asking me to stand in a room and smile at whoever did this. Yes. And to trust you. Yes. Something crossed his face that she could not name, which I am aware I have no right to ask this evening. Every part of her that had spent a lifetime watching the Eastern Road for men who were lying, said no. All right, she said. I promise. He shut his eyes briefly. Then he pressed his mouth to her forehead, quick and grateful, and she felt it again, that unbearable warmth pouring through the place where they touched, and he stepped back, and the smooth face came down over him like a lid. Go and dance with somebody, he said. Be seen. I will be an hour. She gave him a count of 40. Then she followed him. She kept to the edges, because that is what you do. She watched him go back into the feast and be delightful for 6 minutes, then leave by the south door with the unhurried walk of a man who has somewhere to be, and she followed him down 2 flights into the cold part of the house, where the muniment presses were, and stood in the dark of the passage with her heart going, not wanting to open the door. She opened it. Kievan was standing at the long table, with a lamp turned low. Spread out in front of him were her uncle's private letter books, the ones from the locked press at Ardran Hall she had never once been permitted to touch, that could not possibly be here, that somebody had taken out of that house and brought to Kelmore without telling her. He had a page in his hand and he was reading it, and he was not surprised to see her at all. Ah, said the King of Yvrin, I had hoped for another 2 days. Say something, she thought. Say the thing that makes this a misunderstanding. He set the page down. I have known, since the 2nd week, Kievan said. Known what? That it was your uncle? He said it evenly, and did not look away while he said it, which she would think about for a long time afterward. There are 2 hands in those letters. The older one belonged to a clerk called Petro, who died of a fever in the spring. The younger one I have not placed. Neither of them composed a word of it. Both copied out of drafts, and the drafts were dictated. The turns of phrase are Ansel's. He has been bleeding the loafin into House Vasker for 9 years, and the 2 men on the terrace steps at Hollowmere were paid out of a Vasker account, and one of them was killed by the other for talking. The 2nd week, Eloan said. Yes, you have known for 5 weeks. Yes, you gave me a seal. She could hear her own voice, as though from the far end of a hall. You gave me a royal seal and told me nobody signs above me, and sent me riding out into that district on my own with a box of ledgers, knowing that the man who had already had somebody killed for those books was sitting at my own table. Kievan did not deny it. You used me as a stake in the ground, she said. You wanted him to move, so you made me visible on purpose. Yes. Say something else. I could have arrested him on a clerk's handwriting and a dead man's ledger, and he would have walked out of the hearing inside a month, with the whole loafin convinced I had invented it. I needed him to reach for something in front of witnesses, and the only thing he wanted badly enough to reach for was you. His voice cracked once, quietly. It was the correct decision, and I would make it again, and it is the worst thing I have ever done. And the granary, Eloan said, the night they cut my arm open. You knew then. I knew then. She had to put her hand on the doorframe. And in the archive, she said, when you came round the table and told me you simply wanted me. That was true. He said it fast, The first time all night he had moved quickly. Eloan, every word of that was true. It was true, and it was also convenient. And I have not been able to separate them for a month, and it has been eating me alive. That is not a defense, that is a worse thing than a lie. I know. Why did you not tell me? Her voice broke. You had 5 weeks. You had every night of 5 weeks. Because you would not have believed me. His jaw was tight. Because I would have said, the man who raised you is stealing from the crown. And you would have said, not Ansel, never Ansel. And you would have gone home and asked him, out of loyalty, gently, the way you do. And he would have known inside a day. He looked at her steadily. Tell me I am wrong. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out because she could hear it. She could hear herself in the archive with a Vasker receipt in her fingers, putting it back in the box. There is something else, Kayvon said, and I would rather cut my own hand off than say it tonight. But if I do not say it now, I will be lying to you again by morning. He picked up one of the letter books. Do you know what you said to me at that ball? I remember perfectly. You said that the crown never asks why. That it is easier to write down that the Lofen is poor than to find out it is being robbed. He turned the book around. This is your uncle's letter book from 6 years ago. He writes it in almost those words to a Vaskar factor. He has written it a dozen times. Eloan, half the Lofen believes that about me, and not one of them would say it to my face. And you said it to a room of 400 people, because you had heard it at your own supper table every week for 9 years, until it felt like something you had worked out yourself. The floor moved. He built you, Kayvon said, not unkindly, which made it unbearable. The most reliable witness against me in that district, and she was his, and she thought every word of it was hers. Stop. There is one more. I said stop. The 8th year of the reign, the betrothal contract between House Ardran and House Vaskar. He was very quiet now. It does not name a bride, it names an Ardran daughter. And it was refused, publicly and disgracefully, by the eldest, who thereby ruined herself in front of the entire district and was never offered for again. Eloan stood absolutely still. Corwin Vaskar was 41, Kayvon said. Your sister Nerys was 14, and you knew which one your uncle intended, because you had heard him say it. And you were 18, and you stood up and refused a match in your own name, so that the contract would die with you. His eyes did not leave her face. That is why House Vaskar has had its hand in this district ever since. Your uncle has spent 9 years paying them what he promised them and could not deliver. Every shortfall in every book you have ever kept is the price of your sister. And he has made you carry it, and he has let this family call you a spinster to your face for 9 years, while you paid it. Eloan heard herself say, from somewhere far away, nobody knows that, I know it. Nobody was ever supposed to know that, I am aware, said Kayvon. It is the single best thing I have ever learned about anybody, and I learned it out of an evidence box in a locked room. Because you would not have told me, because you have never once in your life expected to be given credit for anything. And that, in the end, was what did it. Not the deception. She could have got past the deception, given a month and a great deal of quiet. It was that he had known all of it, every last piece of what she was, for 5 weeks, while she lay awake in a narrow bed at Kelmore, being astonished that anyone should want her at all. You let me be grateful, she said. Kayvon flinched as though she had struck him. Lowen, you knew exactly what I was worth, and exactly what it had cost me, and you sat there and let me feel lucky. She was crying and she did not care. I have been paid in nothing for 9 years. I would have taken the truth. It is the one wage I have never once been offered. Please, he said. There is a poisoner in this house and an envoy downstairs, and I need. He caught it. She watched him catch it, half a word. Too late. You need me, said Eloan. Yes, everyone always does. And she walked out. Ansel was waiting at the foot of the stairs. Of course he was. He had been waiting at the foot of the stairs since she was 13 years old, and she went to him the way water goes downhill, and he put both hands on her shoulders and said, "Child, you are white as a sheet, what has he done?" And Eloin, whose whole life had just come apart in her hands, told him, "Not all of it. Enough. Enough." She heard herself saying it was a lie. "Uncle, all of it, he used me," and she felt his hands tighten, and she thought, "He is angry for me," and something at the very back of her skull said quietly, "No, he is not, he is pleased." She ignored it. She had ignored it for 9 years. "Sit down," Ansel said. "There is something you must hear, and I was wrong to keep it from you." He drew a breath. "Your father did not die of a wasting sickness." He had written to the old king about the granary contracts. He found what you found 20 years before you found it. Ansel's eyes were wet. She had never once seen her uncle cry. They stopped him on the Kelmore Road in the last week of the month and made it look like a chill. And that boy upstairs has spent this year making certain the daughter never finished the father's work. That is what the engagement is for. Lowen said nothing. She said nothing, for so long that Ansel had to prompt her, gently, with her name. Because she was not in the corridor anymore. She was 9 years back, in the east room at Ardran Hall, with the shutters closed, holding her father's hand at 4 in the morning, while his breath came apart, and he had not been on any road, and he had not died in the last week of the month, and she had been the only person in the room. She had washed him herself. Ansel had come in the morning. The man who had raised her was standing in front of her with tears in his eyes, lying about the night her father died, to the woman who had been there. Everything went very quiet and very clear. "What do we do?" Eloin asked, and made her face crumple. Ansel's grip changed. She felt it, not comfort. "Wait. We go to the Korath envoy before the king can dress it up," he said. "A king who murders his own vassals to bury a ledger is no king. He will fall by morning. There are good houses ready to steady the realm after him. A beat. But it cannot come from me. I am the girl's uncle. They will say I grasped at it. It must come from you, his own betrothed. If you say it, not one man in that room will doubt a single word." The walk to the East Council room was the longest of her life. She had nothing. No proof, no seal, no time. One woman against the man who held the loyalty of every soldier in the Lofen, and behind that door a foreign envoy who could take the winter grain of 240 souls home in his saddlebag if she got one word wrong. Cavan looked up when she came in behind her uncle, and for half a second his whole face opened. Then he saw who she had walked in with, and it closed. Ansel bowed. "Your Excellency, it grieves me beyond speaking to bring this to you under this roof." He laid it out. The Kelmore Road. The old king's men. The daughter kept close so the father's work would die with her. He was very good. He had a catch in his voice, at exactly the right place, and the Korath envoy went grey. "That is a lie," Kaivan said. "Every word of it is his." "He would say so," said Ansel. "But the king's own bride was in that house. She was there." He turned, and the whole room turned with him. "Eloin, tell his excellency what you know." Every face swung to her. She looked at Kaivan, who had gone completely white, who plainly believed she had come here to bury him, and she thought, "I am sorry. I should have believed you. I will spend a long time on that." Then she turned to the envoy. "My father died in the East Room at Ardran Hall on the 22nd, she said. "At 4 in the morning of a wasting sickness, 3 weeks after he had last been able to stand. I was holding his hand. I washed him myself. My uncle arrived after dawn. There was no road. There were no men." Her chin came up. "And I will tell you the first thing I ever audited. My uncle has been paying Housefast-Car out of loaf and grain for 9 years. There have been 4 attempts on the king's life. There was wolfsbane in the study fire tonight. The room went tight as a drawn bow. She is distraught." Ansel said, "She has had a shock." "Then a search costs you nothing," said the Kureth envoy quietly. And Aloan watched her uncle's face change. The grave, kind, patient man went out of it, and what was left was cornered. He did not go for her. She had half expected him to, and he did not, because Ansel Ardran had never in his life reached for a blade when there was a door available, and he turned and went for the passage at a dead run, toward the muniment tower, toward the paper that would hang him. He got as far as the tower door. He was still hauling on it when she came round the corner behind him, unhurried, with the ring in her hand. "It is locked," Eloan said. "Give me the key. You have never once carried the keys to this house." She held them up. "I have carried them since I was 18, uncle. You signed. I locked up. That was the arrangement. You made it, and you told everybody it was because I had nothing better to do." The guards took him there, at the door, still pulling on the handle. Afterward, the room emptied by degrees, and Thessa stood in the middle of the floor, with her hands at her sides, having heard, along with the whole council of Ivran, exactly what her elder sister had been paying for. And to whom? "Neres was 14, Thessa said. Her voice had no shape at all. I bet 10 silver I know. 9 years, I bet 10 silver. And you," Thessa stopped. "The color of paper, why did you never say?" "Because she was 14 and she would have known what she had cost me and she would have carried it. It was cheaper, if I carried it." Eloan picked up her keys. "That is the whole of my character, and I would be grateful if nobody made a speech about it." Then it was only the two of them, and Cavan had not moved from where he stood. "You saved my life," he said, "after everything." I came to stop a traitor," said Eloan. "That is all that happened here." "Eloan, on the wall walk. It was real and you know it was. It does not matter whether it is real." Her voice did not rise. That was the thing about Eloan. Her voice never rose. "You looked at me every day for 5 weeks, knowing every single thing I was. And you let me be grateful to you for noticing me. A bond does not undo that." She went to the door. "I am glad you are alive. You will be a good king. I do not think I can ever trust you again." She walked out. She was warden of the granaries of Ivran for 6 months, and she was extremely good at it, and she had always known she would be. The realm had changed shape around her. Ansel sat in a cell under the old fort. House Faskar had been broken open like a rotten sack, and the district books were audited to the last stroke by clerks who answered to her. Korith signed. The Lothin came through the winter on full rations for the first time in 9 years, and 240 souls at Ardran Hall ate, and none of them knew why, and that was fine. That had always been fine. The king had done every bit of it. The city had begun cautiously to love him for it. He had also spent 5 of those 6 months trying to get her back. He did it badly at first. There were flowers, an appalling number of flowers, and she sent them to the infirmary and the temple and let her clerks laugh. There was a standing invitation to the council table, which she accepted because she was not a child, and which meant that twice a week she stood across 4 feet of oak from a man whose face did something hopeful every time she came in, and she looked at the troop numbers. Then he stopped trying to be clever and started writing. That was harder, because he wrote them himself, in his own hand, and she knew what that meant, and so did he. 61 letters in a dead clerk's writing had built the lie that ruined her house. He was answering it the only way it could be answered, 1 real page at a time, and he never once said so. They came 2 and 3 a week. Some were short. Some were about nothing at all. A pension dispute, a posting in the north, a question about drainage. Any clerk could have answered, as though her honest answer were still worth having. One said, "I have written the word sorry so many times it has stopped meaning anything, so I will send it in pieces, and hope the pieces add up." Another said, "You told me I let you be grateful. It is the truest thing anybody has said to me, and I did not deserve to have it said kindly." And one, near the bottom of a long page, she had promised herself she would not finish, said, "I do not want you back because you are useful." There is not 1 hour of any of this That means anything if you are not in the room. She kept them. She never answered one. She kept them in the locked press at Ardran Hall, in the drawer her uncle had used, which she was aware was not subtle. Nares came in the third month, and stood in the doorway of the estate room for a long time before she could speak, and then she said, "I copied the drafts, some of them." He gave me pages in his hand, and made me write them out plain, and told me it was practice. She was shaking. I was 17. I did not know what they were. And then I did know, and I said nothing, because he is our uncle. And I have been trying to tell you for 2 years, and I could not, I know, the Eloan, and got up, and held her sister while she came apart. Thessa did not apologize. Thessa was not built for it. What she did instead was arrive at the granary at 6 in the morning in her second-best coat, every day for 4 months, and count sacks. She was terrible at it. She got better. Neither of them mentioned 10 silver again. "Talk to the man," Thessa said, on a cold morning in the 5th month, without looking up from the tally. "There is nothing to say. You are miserable. He is miserable. I have been counting sacks since October, and I have earned the right to an opinion." In the 6th month, a letter came that was different. "Eloan," it said, "I have spent 5 months asking you for something you have already answered. You have been clear, and I have been pretending not to hear it, because hearing it costs me more than I can afford. That is not courtship. That is a man making his own grief your problem. You have carried enough for other people. You will not carry this. I will stop now. I am sorry. Be well. K." She read it twice. This was what she had wanted. In writing, for 5 months. So she could not account for sitting in the estate room, with the page in her hands until the candle went out. He kept his word. No letters, no flowers. In the corridors of Kelmore, he inclined his head and said, "Warden," evenly, not cold, never cold, simply finished, and went past her, and Eloan discovered that a thing can hurt considerably more once it stops. For 2 weeks, she did her work, and she did it well. In the 3rd week, Thessa came into the granary office at 11 at night, and behind her was Nares, and both of them were the particular grey of people who have just been handed something they do not want. "What?" said Eloan, standing. "He is gone," Thessa said. "The king. Not in his chambers, not in the yard. Nobody has seen him since the 10th bell. And his sword is on its stand, and his horse is in the stall." The room tilted. 4 attempts, Eloan said. There were 4. She did not remember getting her coat. No horse gone, no coin drawn. Boots by the bed, sword on its stand, the room neat and cold and empty. And at the east postern, the trackers had his scent and lost it at the wall, the way a scent stops when a man is being careful, or when a man is being carried. And Eloan stood in the yard in the dark and understood that there was exactly one way left to find him, and that she had spent 6 months making certain it would not work. She had kept the bond shut like a fist. Leave one open, and it deepens. Deepen it, and it sets. And so she had held it closed every hour since the wall walk, and called it good sense. "It is duty," she thought. "He is the king. Finding him is my job." She opened it. It came through like a door blown in. Sadness first, deep and level and horribly familiar, because it was the twin of the thing she had been carrying under her own ribs since October. Then, shame. Then a slow, warm, swimming confusion, everything coming loose at the edges. He was not drugged. He was, she realized, extremely drunk. And he was 3 miles northwest of her, and she knew exactly where, because there was only one thing 3 miles northwest of Kelmore, and it was Hollowmere. The ball was in its 2nd hour when the warden of the granaries came through the doors in a mud-spattered coat with her hair down. And it did not matter, because nobody was looking at the doors. They were all looking at the pastry table. The King of Ivorin leaned against it in a plain dark coat, with no chain and no ring, holding a glass he had very much drunk from, explaining something at length, and with enormous sincerity to a stranger who plainly wished to be anywhere else on earth. The difficulty, Caven was saying, is that I did not lie to her. Everyone assumes I lied to her. I never lied to her once. I simply knew a great many true things about her, and did not say them, and she has explained to me that this is worse, and she is correct. He drank. Do you know she refused a marriage at 18 to protect a child? Nobody knows that. Her own sisters did not know. They called her a spinster for 9 years to her face, and she let them, because correcting them would have cost the child something. Your Majesty, said the stranger faintly. And I found it in an evidence box. In a box, he gestured with the glass, and most of the room swayed after his hand. So, when people ask me why I chose her, and they do ask, they ask constantly, I say, because she is the only person I have ever met who would rather be thought worthless than let somebody else pay. The hall had gone entirely silent. 400 people standing very still. Eloin crossed the floor and took the glass out of his hand. That is enough, she said. The stranger fled with an expression of religious gratitude. Kievan blinked at his own empty fingers. Then his eyes found her face, and every miserable, ruined line of him cracked open into something so delighted it was painful to look at. Eloin, he breathed. What were you thinking? No guard, no word. The trackers lost you at the wall, and half of Calmore is out searching the river. I told the wall guard where I was going. He said it was a poor idea. He was right. Promote him. 4 men have tried to kill you. Yes, but they are all in prison, and I checked. He swayed and put a hand on the table to arrange it. I came to see the pastry table. It is a very important table. Get up. I am up. This is up. He looked at her with his whole heart hanging out of his face. Entirely undefended. No charm anywhere on him at all. I stopped writing. I said I would. And I did. 3 weeks. I would like that noted. I would also like it noted, said the King of Ivran, that I am very much in love with you, and that I have been standing at a pastry table telling a stranger about it, which I understand is how this is done in this family. Somewhere in the hall, somebody laughed and stifled it. Eloin's throat closed. Marry me, Kavan said. The room made a sound like a held breath. You are drunk, comprehensively. He said it exactly as he had said it in her father's hall, and then all the bravado went out of him at once, and what was left was small and raw and completely unguarded. Marry me, please. I am not asking you to trust me. I know what that costs, and I know I spent it. I am asking for the chance to earn it back, one true thing at a time for the rest of my life, and I will not once be clever at you again. He ran out of words and put his head into his hand. I said I would stop asking. I am sorry. I will stop. And through the open bond it came pouring, unguarded. No mask on any part of it. The man who hid everything, hiding nothing whatsoever. Eloin stood in the middle of the Hollowmere ballroom with 400 people watching and smiled for the first time in 6 months. Ask me again when you are sober, she said. His head came up. Ask me tomorrow, she said, when you can remember having asked, and you will say, yes. He breathed it. She put her hand against his cheek, and his eyes fell shut, and the whole enormous weight of the King of Ivran came down warm and boneless against her shoulder. Ask me tomorrow, said Eloin Ardran, and find out. It took him 5 months. He asked every single day, sober in every way a man can be, and a few no sensible man should attempt. He asked across the council table until Thessa threatened to resign in writing. He asked at the granary at 6 in the morning with the tally in his hand. He asked badly and beautifully and, once with so many flowers that the barracks smelled like a funeral for a fortnight. And every day, she told him to ask again tomorrow, until one perfectly ordinary Thursday she looked up from a drainage return at the man waiting hopefully across the table, and said yes. The whole district came. The boy king nobody had taken seriously, and the plain elder daughter of the Lofin, who had held a roof up for 9 years. While her own family laughed, he cried, during the vows, she had known he would. She did not, quite, But the bond gave her away entirely, and he laughed at her through his own tears until she stopped caring, who saw Thessa, stood up at the breakfast afterward, and said, 9 years ago I opened a wager on my sister. I lost it, and I have never been so glad to be poor. It was not a good speech. She meant every word, which was new for her. And late that night, in the quiet, Kayevan said, "They will tell this story for 30 years, you know. They will say the Alpha King chose you at a ball." "They will be wrong," said Eloin. "They will. I chose. I stood at a pastry table and said the true thing out loud, and you were merely the one man in the room who happened to look up." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Kavan said. She kissed him. For once in her life, she did not argue.